Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining our session. I'm Seth Kunoff. I'm a class of 2021 undergrad pursuing a Bachelor of Science degree in landscape architecture here at Cornell, and I'll be your MC for today. If you have any questions for today's speakers, please use the Zoom Q&A feature, and we'll take questions at the end if there's time. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge and thank our sponsor, Bartlett Tree Experts. For over 110 years, Bartlett Tree Experts has been providing residential and commercial property owners science-based solutions and expert care for trees and shrubs. Bartlett has over 120 offices throughout the US, Canada, and the United Kingdom. The 400-acre Bartlett Arboretum and Research Grounds in Charlotte, North Carolina, serves as the company's diagnostic research and training center, in addition to holding some of the largest plant collections in the world. Thank you. Also, if you are a licensed professional and would like to receive 1 CEU credit for this course, please visit www.labash.org/laces. Now I'm excited to introduce our 3 speakers for this morning. Jessica Henson is a partner at OLIN, where she leads planning and design projects that seek to create socially and environmentally resilient infrastructure, including the Los Angeles County LA River Master Plan and the Rio Hondo Confluence Area Project. Her other significant projects include Chicago's Vista Tower, a new residential precinct at the University of Washington in Seattle, the new US Embassies in London and Brasilia, the O'Hare Global Terminal, the SELA Cultural Center, and the LA River Index. Jessica's work explores the relationships between hydrological, cultural, and social contexts. Specifically, she explores how landscape architects can create anticipatory design solutions that create more equitable communities. Jessica teaches at the University of Southern California and has taught at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Sylvia Palms joined OLIN in 2019 after nearly 20 years of professional practice in institutional and public landscape planning and design. Her work revolves around environmental justice, and she has directed each of her projects to advance the health of the urban ecosystem, leveraging human, cultural, and ecological systems to solve problems and create accessible, meaningful, healing landscapes. Her current project focus at OLIN is planning a coastal multi-use transit-oriented development to be resilient and adaptive to sea level rise. Alongside her project work, she leads initiatives toward the advancement of diversity, equity, and inclusion, both within the office and throughout the profession of landscape architecture. Thank you for joining us. Eve Yi Ding is a landscape architect at OLIN, where she has worked on projects that seek to practice equity and justice, including 11th Street Bridge Park in Washington, D.C. Eve holds a Master of Landscape Architect from the University of Pennsylvania and a Bachelor of Architecture from South China University of Technology. Today, they're presenting their talk titled Practicing Justice. Welcome, Jessica, Sylvia, and Eve.
Hi, Seth, and everyone. Thank you so much for that great introduction. We're really happy to be here today to speak with y'all. And good morning. Happy Saturday morning as part of the LaBash conference. I hope some of you got to catch Kofi's keynote last night. I think it was really great and set a great stage for this conversation this morning. I'm really happy to be here with you today. We're going to each talk about a different facet of our practice today. And really, as we thought about how we wanted to frame this today, we really wanted to think about it as a series of scales. So on this next slide, you can see there's this sort of cross section that we're trying to create between our practice that is engaging communities. We're engaging change as part of our practice at OLIN. And we're not perfect, and you'll see in our slides today some of the areas that we're working to expand. And so Sylvia is going to start by talking about what we're doing internally at our office. And we find that how our internal setup and culture works really then becomes part of and a reflection in our practice and in our projects as well. And so then Eve and I are going to each talk about one of our projects in our office right now that has a special lens on equity. Eve's going to talk about the 11th Street Bridge. I'm going to talk about our work along the LA River in Los Angeles. And this hopefully will be able to be a good lens on how we're working to practice justice, of course, that being a play on words, practice in the sense of the field, the practice of landscape architecture, and bringing justice, environmental and social justice into that, but also practice in the idea of keeping up a regular practice, a regular daily sort of reminder in our lives that justice and equity are really essential to our work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sylvia. We'll get started right away, and looking forward to your questions at the end as well.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning. It's a privilege to be here and speak with you today. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday morning. For some of you, I know this is early, so I'm going to jump right in. At this time 1 year ago, what we call professional practice changed. This was the view out my window in the first week of April 2020. It happens to be a nearly identical view today. I recognize the privilege I had then and enjoy today in being able to work from home and with this view. Though over the past year, the perspective has changed. These were the very early, still in a state of shock days of quarantine in this pandemic. We were feeling the vulnerability of our design profession as headlines declared the constriction of economic activity. To keep connected and maintain a positive spirit, to marshal the productivity that would be required to stay viable as a company, at OLIN we met often. We adapted to the surreal nature of the times. We have great technical capabilities and feel incredibly lucky to have made a relatively smooth transition to the new virtual workplace. We enjoy a close office culture at OLIN, and early on we made it an office-wide practice that each of us would send a weekly memo of appreciation or reflection out to the email list that includes every member of the internal OLIN community. Such a practice takes purpose, energy, and commitment. We shared recipes, household plant and pet photos, and favorite spring moments. And so it was within this context that the events of less than a year ago, the murder of George Floyd and the civil unrest that followed, that our self-preservation bubble popped and awoke us to a new imperative, not to survive, but to thrive. We understood from science this was an issue with an ecosystem of our society, and the ecosystem of our professional practice. On Monday, June 1st, our OLIN community emails shifted in topic and tone. I myself had only been at OLIN for 9 months, but I sent the first email that morning, not quite knowing how it would be received, asking OLIN to lead by example. The words on the screen here were the first reply I received and came from our senior research associate. I'm going to read this to you. This is an incredibly difficult time to focus on our work, even as the significance of our work becomes more striking. We know that social justice is a design issue, that institutional, structural, and systemic racism are design issues, that perceived and real safety in public space are design issues. We see the implications of our urban design and planning, good and bad, past and present, on the news with glaring clarity. Later that same day, the OLIN community met to begin planning action to double down on practicing justice. It is one thing to say, it is another thing to do. Even as we talk with you here today, we want to be clear that we're grappling with messy and challenging topics. We're not here to claim solutions, but to describe how we are reflecting on our practice and how we are trying to shift and grow. By presenting here, we mean to invite you into a process that is underway. We are here both to offer and to learn lessons. And so the practice begins. It is a matter of making a commitment, respecting your own capacity, drawing on your strengths, and returning to it again and again. As a first step after June 1st, and through intense planning, the partners of OLIN came together and made a commitment to act. The statement was public and specific. It includes targeted donations, hiring goals, employee awareness training, and research to foster social and economic justice for Black and other oppressed communities, increase minority leadership in our own studio and in our profession, build a more inclusive and aware organization, and expand the capacity of our practice to combat disparities caused by racial and ethnic disenfranchisement. OLIN was not unprepared for action. OLIN Labs is a community of practice at OLIN where we work to advance the development of the knowledge, techniques, and tools that benefit our practice, projects, our profession, and the places we engage. We realized an opportunity to leverage OLIN Labs' research, education, and internship recruitment efforts toward fulfilling our commitments. The current plan is to host a summer intern from an historically Black college and university, or HBCU, to participate in grant-supported research for our Soilless Soils initiative. People Lab did much of the legwork to develop the partners' commitment statement and has spearheaded much of the action since then. The People Lab ethic, that is, its practice, is rooted in inclusion and justice. Through People Lab, we seek to rigorously and empathetically inform the relationship between the places we design and the people that live with them. Let's focus on those words rigorously and empathetically. Rigor requires a deep dive and significant energy. Empathy requires an understanding that comes from experience. Back in that first week of June, we established a collection of resources around the belief that Black lives matter. The OLIN research base houses such internal resources for OLIN employees to both access and contribute. These are the topics of our BLM resources, including lists of published works, links to organizations, and recordings of visiting speakers who we've invited since June. Since then, we've organized monthly BLM community conversations. Each month, a participant selects from our resource collection to prompt discussion. We generally try to address topics within the framework of landscape architecture, design, and practice issues, but we understand landscape architecture as a social and cultural practice, and by that, a wide variety of justice issues are readily understood within the framework. At the same time, we make an effort to center Black voices. As there is not currently adequate representation of African Americans within our profession, we must make room for their presence by intentionally seeking to learn more about and be influenced by Black history, cultural contribution, experience, and promise. Here we are looking at the initiative of just a few from whom we've learned, including Kofi Bloom's 8 Propositions, the Urban Studios Cut Fill Unconference, the Joint Center for Housing Studies of Harvard University, and the Black Space Manifesto of Ifeoma Igbo. Not settling for the existing methods of practice, at the start of 2021, OLIN's board extended an invitation to any individual or group of colleagues at OLIN to present ideas for new ways to do better. This is from OLIN CEO Lucinda Sanders. Along with change comes the opportunity to rethink our future. And that future must continue to be built on a foundation of morals, values, and ethics. For us to be able to do that, we need to have the discipline to revisit the why of our work and the courage to question what we have always done, and even how we have gone about doing our work. In addition to the several initiatives that are already underway, tell us what else we need to be thinking about and acting on. I myself worked with a small team to make a pitch to the board, addressing a topic we saw as central to the commitment by OLIN leadership. We launched what we call the Pipeline Project. To start to go beyond recruiting from too few landscape architecture programs at HBCUs, we began a high-level systematic analysis of state universities with landscape architecture or urban design programs. But we soon recognized the lack of diversity within the LA programs themselves. Within our working group, we by simply reflecting on our own trajectory into the profession, we saw that connections, privilege, and luck were determining factors in who might even consider studying landscape architecture. If we wanted to change this, we realized that well before the recruitment process, we were most likely to influence the demographics of our office and, more importantly, of our profession by creating opportunity for younger people. So we took what we learned from our public university analysis and determined that we would support a pre-college summer program here in Philadelphia, likely through a mix of scholarship assistance, mentoring, project tours, and lectures. The intent is to offer connections, privilege, and luck to those who might never otherwise know of the profession. At the same time that our and various other pitches to the board have been developed into real initiatives, OLIN Labs has taken on a much broader initiative to apply our skills and resources toward advancing the Green New Deal through the Landscape Architecture Foundation's Super Studio. We held an internal competition to see who would represent OLIN for consideration by the LAF to be included in a curated collection to form a national vision for the Green New Deal that can support policymakers and advocate to advance Green New Deal ideas and approaches. Sometimes more is more, so each team that competed for the opportunity will actually be advancing toward the LAF submission. Moreover, in addition to our preparation for the LAF Summit, we will advance the work of these projects through 2021 to mark the year of the Green New Deal at OLIN. I'll introduce my team's initiative to you. I'm currently working on a project in Massachusetts that will be subject to sea level rise. And while we can protect our client's site through designed resilience, it will not protect the surrounding and inland communities. So how can we avoid climate gentrification as a result of this project? How do we share resilience? How might we open source resilience? Our tremendous support system at OLIN offered training in systematic research. One thing I've definitely learned is that having access to school libraries should not go unappreciated or underused. The majority of these resources I was able to access because OLIN has memberships at institutional libraries. The rigor produces results. In trying to tackle how people living in historically low income, systemically oppressed and underserved urban communities can achieve resilience in the face of sea level rise, we homed in on a process rather than a solution. The goal is to build a cooperative of partners and community to leverage, develop, and apply their combined skills, knowledge, and resources to mitigate sea level rise, prepare for adaptation, prevent displacement, and plan a more equitable, environmentally just future. We see the cooperative as process-based with a plurality of participants who, through a development and sharing of skills, knowledge, and resources, create an exchange. We're currently in the process of identifying and cultivating the component members of this cooperative, but the intention is to seek broad inclusivity, asking always who is not present, who is not yet at the table. And we're looking at models for how this cooperative would be formed. We hope that by the time we submit our idea to the LAF this June, we will have all the component parts to begin grant writing towards supporting ongoing work with the community to develop open source resilience. Though these actions and initiatives I have just described are all ongoing, and though project work is picking up steam as society imagines the horizon of this pandemic, we're already asking what is next. DEI is a company-wide concern that is championed by OLIN leadership and HR and business development are working through policy and practice issues. As we come up to the 1-year anniversary of our embrace of Black Lives Matter, within People Lab, a few of us are tackling how best to situate our BLM initiatives within a larger framework of diversity, equity, and inclusion. How to open the umbrella without losing our energy behind BLM concerns. We want to integrate a speaker series with our community discussions. We want to grow our knowledge-based resources to augment initiatives in support of other underprivileged, disenfranchised, oppressed, and marginalized groups. We have seen that coming together to discuss challenging topics inspires us to do more to make a difference. Recently, one of our community discussions suggested a new effort to promote democratic space through project work, starting from how we respond to RFPs. And this will loop back to inform business development. I believe we have an ethos at OLIN to leverage strength, ours with others, and privilege of significant commissions and venues where our voices are heard toward good. And these times we live in and work in are demanding we put this ethos toward practicing justice. And now I'll turn over the screen to Eve Ding, who will talk about how we apply this ethos to our project work.
Thank you, Sylvia. Hi, good morning. My name is Eve Ding. It is really an honor to be here. Thank you, LA Bush, for having us. So today I'm going to share the 11th Street Bridge Park, which is an example of a public project that repurposes aged infrastructure to create a destination park based upon community-generated programming. Next. So the project started with a competition in 2014. Our team, OMA and OLIN, was chosen to design and realize our scheme. Back in 2017, a feasibility study was done to ensure the structural constructability. And we are currently now in our design development phase. The project is aiming to start construction at the end of 2022 and hopefully open to public in late 2023. Next. The DC Department of Transportation project is located between the US Capitol to the west and the Frederick Douglass House in Anacostia to the east, connecting the community adjacent to the Anacostia River together with the health of the river community itself. Next. The project is a connector, and more importantly, it's a place of interchange, exchange, interact, and gathering. Next. Here is an overview of our key program. Sorry, can you go back to, it's okay, yeah. This place of programming, yeah, it's okay, sorry. Generated and identified with community feedback and engagement. So this is the first page of the programming list. This is at the east side of the park. I'm going to walk you through the park from here. So the Anacostia approach to the left of the page is a large, soft, accessible landscape leading you up to the bridge park from the east side. The Environmental Education Center in the center of this page is the anchor at this entry, offering for space for community and children and bringing together various organizations involved in the future of the Anacostia. The river ecology themed, the play area to the right of this page encourages young generations to learn and interact with Anacostia river culture. Next. Here we are close to the center of the bridge. The cafe is a place offering affordable menus, as well as community spaces for different events and social opportunities. The urban agriculture promotes accessible, healthy food production and consumption. The Anaquash Plaza, to the right of this page, is the main gathering space at the center of the bridge with great views to the river and offers spaces for various events. Next. Now we get all the way over to the west side. The Hammock Grove is a place with shade and lawn where you can enjoy the breeze from the river in the summer. The amphitheater has a flexible stage that can accommodate small events and shows. With the sitting steps looking over to the river, it can also be a place to relax at a daily basis as well. Finally, to the right of the page, the Navy Approach is where you can access the park from the west side with the gardens and native plantings on both sides of the path leading you up to the park. Next. So beyond all of these programming and site scale considerations, the project has been facing bigger challenges. Next. In relation to city's Potomac River, the Anacostia River is commonly referred to as the Forgotten River. It has multiple environmental challenges, including contaminated soils, combined sewer overflows, trash, and debris in the river. Next. And the river is currently a social divider in terms of population, income, and unemployment rate. Next. And there are also great health disparities between white and African American populations. Next. And the neighborhoods on both sides of the river has historically been disconnected, and those especially in the neighborhoods east of the river lack many of the basic services or amenities, including access to healthy food, safe areas to enjoy outdoors, affordable housing, and clean water. Next. And unfortunately, the real estate pressures are causing displacement. The citizens lost their homes, their businesses, their places of worship, but most importantly, their cultural connectivity. Next. So this project is a national model for community engagement, equitable development. Given its local, state, and federal collaboration, an equitable development plan was created to proactively prevent the displacement of those residents who have contributed to the vision of 11th Street Bridge Park in the face of current and future real estate pressures in this area of Washington, D.C. This effort started as early as 2014, and the Equitable Development Plan was formulated in 2018, which was almost 5 years before the park's planned open date, and has been keep engaging the community throughout all the stages of design and planning. Next. So the current Equitable Development Plan focuses primarily on jobs and workforce development, housing, small business enterprises that promote economic revitalization, and last but not least, cultural equity. Next. So for jobs, a high percentage of residents live adjacent to the 11th Street Bridge Park are either unemployed or not in the labor force. Working collaboratively with the DC government, workforce development organizations, contractors, and surrounding communities and workers, the 11th Street Bridge Park will prioritize hiring of the neighborhood residents for job opportunities on the bridge park itself. Next. And recognizing that signature parks can increase surrounding property values, the 11th Street Bridge Park is committed to work with the partners and stakeholders to ensure that existing residents surrounding the bridge park can continue to afford to live in their neighborhood once the bridge park is built, and that this kind of affordable ownership and rental opportunities will still exist nearby. Next. Local small businesses provide wealth-building opportunities and increase job opportunities for residents living there, as well as enhance the vibrancy and uniqueness of the neighborhood. The 11th Street Bridge Park is committed to supporting new and existing local small businesses surrounding the park, both directly, for instance, they will offer small kiosks for those businesses to operate following the construction of the bridge park on it, and also through partnership with economic development organizations. Next. The 11th Street Bridge Park will serve as a platform to celebrate history and culture of the communities on both sides of the Anacostia River, and in particular to amplify the stories, culture, and heritage of neighboring African American residents. Next. So this kind of engaging the community has always been playing a huge role in forming the both equitable development plan and the actual design ideas. For instance, this cute model on the right of the page is actually a design made together with the community during one of the earlier engagement sessions. Next. And what is very fortunate is while creating this equitable development plan, this community input and feedback have generated some additional equity tools and initiatives. Here are a couple examples. Community Leadership Empowerment Workshop is a tool that amplifies the voice and power of the community residents. It is a 9-session course that focuses on personal leadership, community organizing, and understanding the urban planning process. And the Education Save DC to the right of this page is a children's saving account program for the residents living in this neighborhood with a 5-to-1 match up to $1,800 to help with future college education for those kids. Next. And here are some of the lessons learned in terms of the community engagement, among which I would really like to highlight that it is really critical to start early, start this process early, even before there is a plan. In this way, the community can be truly engaged instead of just being informed. Also, it is just as important to have community input during the planning phase as it is during the implementation and create a continuous feedback loop. Next. And this is the end of my sharing. I will pass over to Jessica.
Thanks, Eve. And thank you, Sylvia. So as we sort of continue our scalar expansion between internal to our office and start moving out from a singular project like the 11th Street Bridge for something totally different, on the next slide here, I'm going to talk about the Los Angeles River Master Plan. And this, oh, there we go. There he is. There's the heron. And keep moving this out here. We started working on the Los Angeles River in 2014, actually as a pro bono effort through our research and between OLIN, Geosyntech, and Gary Partners. And that has become an effort with Los Angeles County over the last 3 years to update their LA River Master Plan overall. Next slide. So the Los Angeles River is 51 miles long. If you're familiar with the Los Angeles region, the city of Los Angeles, downtown Hollywood, is kind of right in the center of this map on the right. And the river itself starts flowing in the San Fernando Valley, or the valley, if you're familiar, say, with like Hollywood lingo. At mile 51 in Canoga Park, it runs along the northern side of the Santa Monica Mountains, through Studio City, through Burbank, Glendale. It takes a sharp turn to the south about River Mile 30, flows past Griffith Park through an area called the Narrows, which gets its name because it's narrow. This is the outlet, if you will, into what it would have historically been the Delta in the Los Angeles Plain. It flows by Los Angeles downtown through Chinatown, Boyle Heights, and then it starts its journey through the southeast cities, Vernon, Commerce, Maywood, Bell, Compton, Southgate, and then flows out to the Pacific Ocean at River Mile 0 in Long Beach. Thinking about this entire river system, which is about an 827 square mile watershed, as a regional plan, when we started thinking about this, was really important to us. And everybody knew, I think everyone probably knows, that the LA River historically is a flooding, flashy river. And so the hydrology and the hydraulics are always high on everyone's mind. But what folks don't always realize is how significant this river is as a social connector and cultural part of Los Angeles. Next slide. Roughly 1 million people live within the Los Angeles River, within about a mile of the river, and about a quarter of the California population, about 10 million people, live within a 1 mile drive. At the same time, about 100,000 cubic feet per second of water can flow through the river near downtown Los Angeles in a 1%, or a storm that there's a 1% chance happening in any year, commonly called a 100-year storm. Just to put that in context, if you've ever been to Niagara Falls, only 85,000 cubic feet per second flow over that at any given time. And so the amount of water that can rush through this river, which has all of these people and all of these communities adjacent to it, is pretty phenomenal. Next slide. Like I mentioned, there are 17 cities, 23 city of Los Angeles neighborhoods, various Los Angeles County areas along this river. And what that leads to on the next slide is a diverse patchwork of communities. LA is an incredibly diverse region as it is. And as you can see here in some of the breakdowns from the Census Department and where those populations live, historically wealthier populations, historically white populations, have lived in the mountains and along the beachfront. Those have been sort of the popular places to live. And the river itself in many communities has been seen as a backyard, and has become a place where historical issues like the channelization itself, redlining, flooding, other concerns have really made the communities along the LA River not have the same opportunities as other areas in this region. Next slide. These issues of equity have become actually the backbone of the 2020 LA River Master Plan. Well, I say the 2020 plan. This is kind of like the 2020 Olympics. It's the 2020 plan that's going to come out in the 2021 due to the pandemic. So maybe someday we'll start calling it the 2021 plan. It is out for public draft right now. You can go to the website at LARiverMasterPlan.org and read the entire thing as well as the appendices. But this plan is an update of the 1996 plan. The 96 plan was the first time anyone really thought, well, maybe this shouldn't just be a single benefit flood management infrastructure. Maybe we could do more. And it started to explore the idea of habitat areas or trails. But really here we are 25 years later and really demanding more in terms of this. And so a lot of what we've been working on in this plan are our goals to do with equity, with communities, with housing, with persons experiencing homelessness, recognizing that we cannot focus on singular issues, but really need to be multi-benefit. So on the next slide, you can see the 9 goals of the plan. So the goal is the plan is very much so driven by these goals, which were derived from a community process. We had 10,000 people participate in different meetings, had about a million people engage online some way with the project development, and really recognizing that yes, water, flood risk, resiliency, water quality, water supply are critical when we think about the river, as well as parks, open space, and access. But really some things that might be a surprise to folks for a public infrastructure plan being done by a quote unquote a flood control district public works department. So embracing and enhancing opportunities for arts and culture, addressing adverse impacts to housing affordability and persons experiencing homelessness, fostering opportunities for continued education development and engagement. So all of these things together form the LA River Master Plan. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how this plan is supported through data. And then I'm only going to really talk about one facet a little bit because we have a little bit of a sampler platter, if you will, this morning and as part of this panel. So I'm going to focus in a little bit on the housing research and work we've been doing. Next slide. So the first challenge really in terms of understanding a system, this regional plan, was how do we understand, how do we look at data across a 51-mile region in such diverse communities? So we developed this LA River Rule. It's a tool of measurement, if you will. Next slide. It's a linearized version of the 51-mile river. And what this allows us to do is quickly understand the varying conditions of communities along the river. Next slide. So for example, taking something like the park need assessment map in Los Angeles County, areas here with red are areas of very high park need. You can see a lot of those areas are adjacent to the river. And so what we have done is looking at this in that linear format on the next slide, you can start to quickly see neighborhoods along the river that have high park need, for example. This is a very simple example of how this database system works, but you start to see neighborhoods that have lack of access and lack of open space. We know that this leads to all sorts of health concerns and also just equity issues in communities. But the neat thing about the river ruler system, which is shown on the next slide, is as you start to compare different data sets, in this example, the CalEnviro screen, which looks at environmental burdens on the left, with park need in the center, we can start to see overlapping areas along the river where high needs are really connected. And so we start to see a lot of connections between things like park access, environmental burden, and you'll see in some of the upcoming slides, other issues such as health, or I'll even show you a COVID map in a second. So this is how it works. On the next slide, you can see that we've looked at over 200 different data sets. And what we forced our team between Geosyntec, OLIN, Gary Partners doing this work is to bring all of the different data into the same comparable formats. So a lot of times on projects, I think, and I'll just speak since you're all students and learning, as landscape architects, we're like, oh, okay, the engineers will do that and they'll do this. But I want to encourage you, don't think and don't work that way. Really bring the interdisciplinary information together, bring it into a format that really strengthens decision-making. And so bringing all of this data together into comparable formats has really allowed us to understand along the river how communities are being impacted by things like the flood management system, or how communities are being impacted by urban heat island or lack of tree canopy and shade connectivity. And only when really bringing those formats together have some of those patterns emerged. Next. What you start to see very heavily is in the lower river, along the river, and especially in the southeast cities in the lower river, a lot of issues of social vulnerability, especially relative to climate change, things like urban heat island, lack of tree canopy really start to emerge. You see that in the red areas here, particularly in downtown LA, Southgate, Compton, areas like that. And then you start to see how these factors really align with other issues we're facing right now. Next slide shows the COVID mapping. And this was as of mid-March. And you can see that a lot of the communities that are lacking open space, lower income communities, often communities of color, and then communities that have been historically disenfranchised through practices like redlining are again, we're seeing them show up in these maps as communities that have suffered the most in the last year during the pandemic. And it's really, when you start understanding these data layers, start understanding how different histories of design have even caused this. And inequitable investment in the last 30 years along the river has actually led to increasing amounts of parks in neighborhoods that already have parks and other communities that are even being left farther behind. And so that's what we're really hoping to remedy. Next slide. In addition to the people that have homes and are living in the communities adjacent to the river, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the fact that Los Angeles County has one of the worst crises right now with persons experiencing homelessness. We have over 63,000 people in LA County by last counts, and about 8,800 of them actually use the river or adjacent areas as their home. And so this has become a major part of our research as well. If you look at the next slide, about 6,300 of that 8,800 are completely unsheltered, like they're not living in a permanent supportive or a temporary shelter, and there just simply are not enough shelters in Los Angeles County to, on any given night, to even remotely cover this. And so in terms of thinking about this, this has shifted one of our major priorities, and I'll wrap up on these last few slides so that we have some time for questions, but to focus on housing. And in this next slide, you can see we're really looking at this because yes, we know that there's some natural ebb and flow in how communities are made up, but we have a severe housing affordability crisis. And it's in some of the lowest tiers, which I'll show you in a second. And as we work on river improvements, parks improvements, infrastructure improvements, we know that those improvements can cause community displacement, that in making that better, property values and rent values go up, and that could cause people to not be able to afford to live there. So if our goal is really to make communities, places along the river better for people that are living there and to make a more equitable and environmentally just future, we have to mitigate that impact. And we need to do that through affordable housing, preservation and new creation, as well as permanent supportive and temporary supportive housing for persons experiencing homelessness. Next. Unfortunately, Los Angeles County is about 500,000 units of affordable housing short right now, which exasperates this issue, and those affordability is lacking in low income and deeply low income categories. Next. And so what we've been working to is map how improvements along the river might change need, and understanding where we have already advanced displacement, advanced gentrification happening, and then looking at areas where we see ongoing or at-risk displacement. Those areas in purple are the areas we really need to focus on proactively in advance of investment being made. As Eve said, need to start early. And then taking that one step further, the areas outlined in black are areas where rent increases would change category to make it one risk level higher. And those neighborhoods that are purple, outlined in black, is where we need investment now in affordable housing. Next slide. The measurements that that really lead into that sort of vulnerability relate to what's the income level, what's the diversity makeup of a neighborhood. Usually if a neighborhood is incredibly stable and a lot of people own their homes, it's less vulnerable to displacement than maybe a community with a lot of renters. Communities that are close to, say, transit are vulnerable to displacement, which you're like, wait a minute, I know I want communities close to transit. Yes, that's a good thing. We want that. But those are places that sometimes displacement can happen first. So we need the most affordable housing investment in those neighborhoods. Next slide. As I alluded to, you can see in this gray line here, as the affordable housing gap has gone up in LA County, so has the number of persons experiencing homelessness. We have a lot of people in Los Angeles that work and cannot afford housing. That is how significant our housing issue is here, that you might actually even have an income, but it's so low and the housing is so expensive you can't afford it. And so you see these lines are almost paralleling each other in the last half of a decade. Next. So what are some of the, so on the simple side of some of our interventions, they're as simple as pavilions and sanitation places along the river, providing equitable access to everyone, from a normal everyday user to someone experiencing homelessness, to be able to use a restroom or a shower along the river in these river pavilions. Currently, the county operates temporary sanitation stations, and we're working to move that towards a more equitable and permanent system. Of course, that as itself is not a suitable long-term solution, but it's a stopgap in the interim. Next slide. The bigger work that we are focused on is land banking for affordable housing and permanent supportive housing. And the reason why we think about this as land banking is it takes a long time to develop housing. It's not like I can snap my fingers and tomorrow have 500,000 units of housing in LA County. It definitely needs to move faster. But what happens as investments and development happen in the county, land prices go up so significantly that it becomes impossible for affordable housing developers to actually purchase land. And so in advance of river improvements, we need to be municipalities and others committed to affordable housing need to be purchasing land and banking it for the ongoing process of housing development. Next slide. There's a lot of detail in the plan about this for anybody that's interested in it, but developing a methodology of how would you select land. Of course, we would want it to be in those communities that are at the highest risk that I showed in that map a minute ago, and we would want to be doing it proactively. Next slide. So that is like the fastest sampler of one of the 9 facets of the Los Angeles River Master Plan. But really the goal is to create 51 miles of connected open space that's really for the communities that are there without a massive displacement, using the 2,300 acres of the river right-of-way to really move the needle for some of the communities that are experiencing the hardest and most underserved, most disadvantaged communities of Los Angeles County. Next slide. So we are at the end here. We would love, great, we have about 12 minutes for questions. So I'd love to welcome those questions.
Yes, thank you all for such an incredible talk. Really interesting stuff there. So thank you for sharing. Yeah, so I guess I could help filter out some of the questions. So the first one we have from Christopher Clinton. He says, what types of design methods are you aware of that can serve to mitigate unjust gentrification? Are there any that stand out?
Yeah, it's a great question, Christopher. I'm going to take that one. There's some really well understood things that can help mitigate displacement, gentrification. And, you know, gentrification in and of itself can be a good thing. Some communities, you know, gentrification meaning the property values are going up. That can be good. Like if you're a homeowner, you want your property to go up. But displacement really occurring when that gets out of control really fast and out of the limits of what a community can afford. So things like land banking for affordable housing that I mentioned are good. Inclusionary zoning is something that's very important. And so that's very much so a policy thing. This requires that us as landscape architects are getting involved sooner in some of these processes. and supporting local policies for things like inclusionary zoning. There are a whole number of tenant protections that can help mitigate this. So things like rent control and other sort of community stabilization through those methodologies. And another one, so Kofi talked a little bit about community land trusts last night. That's another way where you can support the community ownership of land. In terms of design methodologies, super practically, thinking about how a design style, for example, works into an existing community is really important, so that existing residents feel that it is of that place, of that culture, and you're not shifting it to like a totally different design style. That's something as a designer that's really important to be attuned to.
Definitely. Great. So next question we have from Helen Leia saying, I've worked on projects where the community was resistant to equitable proposals like affordable housing. How do you promote equity within large affluent or privileged communities?
Yeah. Education of what it really looks like. I think there's a lot of misinformation about affordable housing out there, and unfortunately a really bleak history of the 20th century and the mid 20th century with like the housing projects. I'm going to put that in quotes here, not my words to choose, but that have led to sort of a really unfortunate history. But the idea of mixed use affordable housing and what that might mean for a community is really important to educate. So for example, on the permanent supportive housing side, something that we've been working towards is actually developing permanent supportive housing for folks that might be experiencing homelessness, especially those that have ongoing challenges, is actually better for community stabilization. People that end up developing these in their communities report less crime. They report less issues with persons experiencing homelessness. And so getting people that have those positive experiences to talk to those communities, to share their experiences, and to educate is really critical. It is hard. There are communities that are against affordable housing. And then I've also had some conversations with communities along the LA River where they're like, affordable housing isn't for us. That neighboring literally, like they've literally said it that way and like moved their hand that way. And you're like, and they're like, because people in our community like to own their homes. And actually, and it's like, wait a second, there are different types of affordable housing. It could be home ownership. It's not all just 1,000 rental units. And so education.
Yeah, I would like to add, I would like to add that I agree with Jessica. Just, a lot of the community members, you really have to have a targeted community outreach with them. I know in 11th Street Bridge Park, our community engagement specialist, Juan Perry from Building Bridge across the river, and his team just reach out to people like one by one, just knocking their door and talk to them and educate them to, get more information out there so people understand what you're doing and then what they can benefit from them, and just do some targeted community outreach will be really helpful.
Great. All right. Next question we have here is, as a practice that has adopted the leadership of the Black Lives Matter movement, how do you think our professional organizations should be responding to these contemporary social movements? Should they be incorporated into policy recommendations, accreditation, licensure, etc.?
I have an opinion on that, but Sylvia, do you want to speak to that one?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the things that we're trying to do is to sort of normalize the acceptance and communication of these issues. That was one of the ways that we meant about being a model. And we feel like the more people that talk about it publicly in forums like this, the more conversation there is, the better sort of caring for one another will happen. And in terms of, you know, being part of accreditation, et cetera, you know, I think that, you know, so I got my licensure a while ago, so I'm not sure exactly what the process is now, but there are different facets of it, like professional practice, you know, all the different tests that you have to take. And, you know, there certainly could be an expansion of the social cultural sort of core of information that would be of value for all practitioners to be aware of.
I think that's,
I'm not sure if I covered all the points of that question.
No, I think that's great. I think the only thing I will add is that I think the National ASLA diversity team is doing a great job of bringing issues to the forefront, and in the last few years has really taken on that sort of head on. And I think of someone like Janelle Johnson, who's doing a lot of that work in leadership. And I think it needs to, like Sylvia said, be not seen as an initiative that's on the side, but really seen as the core practice. And only through that normalizing that it's just part of everything that we're doing is diversity, equity, inclusion, because conversations design is better when more people are at the table, for sure.
Great, awesome. Yeah, thank you guys for such great insights. It's always great to hear. And I think this is going to be our last question, given the amount of time we have left. So here's one I think a lot of the students are kind of interested in knowing, or what your thoughts are. Lucia Pena says, I'm sure all of us here are aware of how expensive this field can be as a student, you know, in terms of materials, printing fees, technology, etc. This type of economic barrier for potentially interested students in the field. What measures do you think schools and universities could or should take besides scholarships in order to help reduce this cost and barrier?
Yeah, it's an expensive experience to go through architecture, landscape architecture school for sure. And I think some departments, especially when I was teaching at the University of Illinois, realizing that, trying to think to be more aware of conversations around costs students are asked. So I think certainly, you know, the hope that university programs would help directly break down those barriers. For us, you know, we're obviously very interested in the scholarship and helping people move into that. And I could see opportunities in the future for sponsorships or other things that could help break down those barriers between different student groups. It's supplies, but it's also travel, in terms of like travel studios and things like that can become quite expensive. And so we need to see more of that. And I think the conversation is getting there, at least in the departments that I've been involved in. It's been a big shift in the last decade from like, well, of course, students will buy whatever compass I tell them to buy and get their supply kit, to really an awareness. And what we did at USC last year is we actually, you know, provided that starter kit for the students directly, and building those costs in relative to that is, I think, is an important step that those of us that teach as educators need to be more aware of moving forward. I know it's not a great answer because I don't have a super perfect way to solve that, but I think we need to make it high on the list in the conversation. Sylvia, did you have something to add?
I was just thinking about some a speaker I heard, I apologize that I don't recall her name, was talking about just sort of self-advocacy, which is certainly not the final answer. But I think, you know, if you take that idea of you recognize as a Black or minority student that, you know, you have something special to offer the program, and you go to the leadership of that program and you basically make demands, that will work in certain instances. And those of us who are in more privileged positions, understanding that there is flexibility and you know, helping amplify that voice, and wherever we have connections with university programs, to reiterate that sort of demand, to say we need diversity in our profession. The only way this is going to happen is for these programs to be more affordable, supporting outreach. And one of the initiatives that we're trying to push in particular with a local university here, a state school, is to help them do that outreach. And if support and donations from us will enable them to reach more diverse audiences, to give them opportunities, that can increase their diverse representation within their school, which will inevitably feed the practice. So, just really being creative and trying to find different ways of connecting through, and it will take a force. It will take everybody here today and everybody and everyone you've ever met in the profession. It will really take diligence to make a difference. And the more people participate, the quicker that's going to happen. And we really believe deeply that the diversity, we need to be part of the communities that we work within. That's the only way it's going to be good, effective design.
Great. Awesome. So I guess now we'll close out the session, and I wanted to say thank you all again for such an amazing talk today. So we'll end here to accommodate the next Zoom sessions. Thank you again, Jessica, Sylvia, and Eve. And thank you everyone for attending. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.